Martha Bell 24, broad, hipped, soft-faced, and too gentle for a world that praised hardness. She stood beside her father's stall, dress faded by years of work, hands red from scrubbing life into someone else's comfort. Her father was selling off the last of their oxen, and with every bid, his shame grew heavier. Whispers chased her through the crowd like wind through dry grass. "She's big enough to pull the wagon herself," someone muttered. Another man laughed. Might as well auction her next. She kept her eyes down. If she didn't look, maybe she could disappear. Then came the sheriff, Harold Clay, wide-bellied, red-faced, full of liquor and arrogance. His voice cut through the crowd like a whip. "Well, folks, if you buy the ox, we'll throw the fat one in for free." The world went silent for half a heartbeat, then burst into laughter. Martha froze. The ground beneath her might as well have opened. Her father looked away, jaw tight, too proud to defend her and too weak to stop it. Every giggle, every smirk, every cruel eye felt like a stone against her skin. She wanted to run, but her knees wouldn't move. Her chest burned not with tears, but with something darker, shame, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you question if breathing is worth the sound it makes. Then, silence again, a voice from the edge of the crowd, low, calm, deliberate. 3 silver coins, the man said, heads turned. Leaning against the hitch rail stood a cowboy, dust, worn and quiet Luke Carver. His hat shadowed his eyes, his face unreadable. He held out 3 coins between his fingers. For her time, he said softly, and her dignity. The sheriff barked out a laugh. Her dignity, boy, that's been gone a long time, but Luke didn't flinch. He just met Martha's eyes not with pity, but recognition. The kind of look that says, "I've seen pain too." Her breath caught. For the first time in her life, someone didn't look through her. He looked at her. He tossed the coins. They clinked against the sheriff's boot. The sheriff stared, smirk fading as the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Laughter didn't sound so strong anymore. Martha's father cleared his throat, stammering something about it being a joke, but Luke had already turned toward his horse. "If you've got work that needs doing," he said quietly, "ride west at sundown. I've got room on the wagon." Then he was gone. The sheriff spat on the dirt, trying to laugh it off, but the sound came hollow. The crowd scattered shame, lingering in the air like smoke after gunfire. Martha stood still, trembling. The wind lifted her hair, carrying the sound of that one voice through her mind again, steady, unshaken. For her time and her dignity, she touched the side of her face where tears wanted to fall, but didn't. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction, not anymore. As the sun dropped behind the hills, she packed her things in silence, a faded shawl, her mother's locket, and what little pride she had left. Her father didn't stop her. Maybe he didn't have the words. Maybe he didn't think she deserved to be defended. By dusk, the road west shimmered with dying light. Each step away from town felt like walking out of her own skin. Behind her, laughter still echoed faintly across the fields. But ahead, somewhere in the orange haze of the horizon, waited a man who had seen her differently, and for the first time Martha Bell didn't walk in shame. She walked in silence, the kind that meant something was breaking, and something stronger was being born. The sun had already slipped behind the ridge when Martha reached the edge of Harper County. The fields were quiet now, the laughter gone, but its echo still bruised her heart. Every step down that dirt road felt like dragging the weight of a life that no longer fit. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay where she'd been broken. Dust rose behind her boots as wagon wheels creaked in the distance. A faint lantern glow appeared, warm, steady, familiar. It was him, Luke Carver, just as he'd said. He didn't call out, didn't ask questions. He simply slowed his horse and looked at her with a nod. "You ready?" She hesitated. "I ain't got much," she whispered. He looked straight ahead. Sometimes that's the best way to start. She climbed into the wagon. The wooden boards were rough beneath her palms, smelling of pine and sweat. For a moment neither spoke. The air between them felt heavy not with words, but with understanding. As the wagon rolled forward, the town lights dimmed behind them until they were swallowed by night. Martha turned once, just once, to see the faint glow of the auction yard. The same place that had humiliated her now looked small and distant. She drew in a slow breath. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust freedom with a sting. Luke guided the reins with calm certainty. His movements were deliberate, patient. He didn't look at her, didn't stare like other men did. His silence wasn't cruel, it was safe. After a while, his voice broke the quiet. "You ride well." Martha shook her head. "I've never had reason to." He gave a slight smile, almost hidden under the shadow of his hat. "Then you'll learn. Out here, reason finds you." They rode through miles of prairie grass whispering against the wheels, stars blinking awake above. Somewhere in that endless stretch of land, she began to breathe again. When the moon rose high, he stopped near a dry creek bed. The fire he built was small, but it cast a soft gold on his face. He handed her a tin cup of coffee. "Careful, it's strong." She took it with both hands. The warmth stung her fingers. "I'm used to strong," she said quietly. He glanced at her, not in pity, not in surprise, just quiet respect. They ate in silence, the crackle of fire filling the spaces words couldn't reach. For the first time since the sheriff's laughter, she didn't feel like prey. She felt seen. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke again. "Why'd you do it, back there?" He stirred the embers with a stick. "Because no man with decency watches someone get stripped of their worth." She stared into the flames, trying to understand a world where someone like him could still exist. "People don't usually step in for me." Luke's voice softened. "Maybe they should have. Maybe that's why I did." She didn't answer. The fire popped. Sparks drifted into the night. She thought about her father, her empty home, the way the sheriff's laughter had cut through her skin. Then she thought of this stranger, his quiet strength, his unspoken kindness. When the fire died down, he laid his blanket across the wagon bench and nodded toward it. "You sleep. I'll keep watch." Her eyes widened. "You don't have to. I said I would." His tone wasn't harsh, just final. She lay down, heart pounding in confusion. No man had ever guarded her peace before. The stars stretched wide above, their light cold but comforting. As she closed her eyes, the wind carried Luke's quiet humming, a tune without words, low and steady. It lulled her like a promise she didn't yet believe. In that fragile space between exhaustion and sleep, she whispered to herself, "He said I was worth more than gold." And for the first time in her life, the words didn't sound like a lie. When morning came, dew glistened on the grass. Luke was already saddling the horse, his silhouette framed by the rising sun. She watched him, the stillness, the strength, the gentleness that hid behind silence. As he tightened the reins, he turned slightly toward her. "Long road ahead." He said, "You sure you're up for it?" She stood straightening her shawl. Her voice no longer shook. "I've been walking through worse my whole life. This one, at least it's leading somewhere." He nodded once. No praise, no smile, just that quiet look again, the kind that said everything words could not. And as the wagon rolled westward into the open plains, Martha Bell left behind the ashes of her old self, the laughter, the shame, the humiliation, all fading behind her like dust in the wind. Ahead lay the unknown, harsh and unforgiving, but within that silence she carried something new, a fragile seed of worth, planted by a stranger who'd seen her differently. Sometimes silence can speak louder than comfort. And on the road west, it spoke in miles. The wagon creaked along the winding trail, its rhythm steady as a heartbeat. Dawn spilled over the plains, brushing gold across the endless horizon. Dust curled behind them like ghosts refusing to let go. Martha sat quiet beside Luke, her hands folded tight in her lap. She still felt the echo of the sheriff's laughter somewhere deep inside, but out here, it seemed smaller, weaker, like it couldn't cross this far. Luke said little. His eyes stayed fixed on the trail, hat pulled low against the morning glare. Every so often he'd glance toward the horizon, reading the land the way other men read books. When he finally spoke, his voice came soft like the land itself was listening. "You get hungry easy." She blinked at the sudden sound. I don't need much." He nodded. "Still, a body needs strength out here. Won't make it on pride." He handed her a small piece of dried bread from his saddlebag. She hesitated before taking it. The gesture was simple, but to her it felt like grace. They rode for hours without a word. The sun climbed higher, turning the sky into a sheet of white fire. Sweat rolled down her neck. Her bonnet clung to her skin. Luke's horse snorted, its hooves kicking up dry earth. At noon he pulled the wagon to a stop near a cluster of cottonwoods by a shallow creek. "We rest here," he said. Martha stepped down carefully, her legs aching from the ride. The grass brushed against her dress, whispering in the wind. She knelt by the water, cupping it into her hands. It was warm and tasted of dust, but it eased the tightness in her throat. Luke unhitched the horse, letting it drink. His movements were precise, not rushed, not lazy, just measured. She watched him for a long moment before asking, "You always travel alone?" He glanced up. "Most times." "No family?" He looked away. "Had one, once." The words fell heavy, final. She didn't ask more. Instead, she sat back under the trees, watching the sunlight dance through the leaves. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was honest, like two people learning how to exist without needing to fill the air. After a while, he sat near her, pulling a piece of jerky from his coat pocket. "You'll find the West is quieter than town life," he said. "Quieter, but it listens. Every sound means something out here." She nodded slowly. "And people," he looked at her, eyes steady, "they mean what they do, not what they say." The truth in his words settled deep. She thought of all the faces that once smiled at her, only to turn cruel when laughter followed. Here, in this raw place of dust and wind, honesty was simple even when it was hard. When the sun began to tilt west, Luke stood. "We'll ride till dark. There's shelter up ahead, my land." Her breath caught. "Your land," he nodded. "Not much left of it, but it's home." The word home lingered like a prayer she didn't dare speak aloud. As they rode again, the landscape shifted, hills flattening into wide, open stretches. The air smelled faintly of burned wood, dry earth, and distance. Somewhere far off, a hawk circled slow and patient. By twilight, the outline of a small ranch appeared against the fading sky, a crooked barn, a half-broken fence, a house standing lonely against the wind. Martha stared at it. "It looks tired," she whispered. Luke's jaw tightened. "It's been through things, like people." When they finally stopped, he climbed down and offered his hand to help her from the wagon. She hesitated, then took it, his palm rough and warm against hers. "You can stay in the main house," he said. "It's clean enough. Roof leaks a little." She nodded. "And you?" "I'll take the barn. Got work to do come morning." She wanted to thank him, but the words caught somewhere in her throat. Instead, she simply said, "Good night." He tipped his hat. "Night, ma'am." Inside the house, the air smelled faintly of dust and old wood. The furniture was simple, a table, 2 chairs, a cold stove. But it was quiet and safe. She sat on the edge of the bed, untying her bonnet. The silence pressed against her ears until it almost hummed. Outside, the wind moved through the dry grass like a song without words. For the first time in her life, no one was watching her, no one was laughing. She whispered into the dim light, "Maybe this is what freedom feels like, lonely but clean." And somewhere outside, Luke Carver stood by the barn, staring into the night. The stars stretched wide above him, and for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking of what he'd lost, but of the stranger now sleeping under his roof. Morning came with the sound of wind scraping against the shutters and the faint creak of the barn doors outside. Martha opened her eyes to a new world, one painted in quiet light and dust motes that drifted like ghosts through the air. The bed beneath her was rough but real. She'd slept lightly, expecting to wake back in that town square, trapped in laughter's echo. But the only sound was the steady rhythm of a man at work. Through the small window, she saw Luke moving across the yard, shoulders squared, shirt damp with effort, hands steady as he lifted a broken beam back into place. He worked like the land itself had trusted him to fix it. Martha rose, washed her face in the cold basin water, and tied her hair back with a strip of cloth. When she stepped outside, the air was crisp and dry. The horizon stretched endless and wild, a place where a woman could vanish or begin again. Luke looked up briefly, then went back to his work. "Morning," he said simply. "Morning," she answered, her voice soft. "You've been up long enough." He didn't explain more. He never did. But somehow she understood. A kettle hissed near the fire pit. She moved closer, kneeling beside it, and poured the boiling water into a tin pot. "Thought I'd make coffee," she murmured. Luke paused his work, watching her. "Didn't have to, I know." She looked up at him, a faint smile flickering at the edge of her lips. "But I wanted to." For a brief moment, his expression softened just enough to betray the quiet surprise behind his calm. They drank in silence, the kind that didn't demand filling. Every so often, a bird would call from the fence post, or the wind would carry the faint rattle of the barn chain. It was all sound, but none of it was noise. After breakfast, Martha walked through the yard, studying the wreckage of what once might have been a proud ranch. The barn leaned, its doors hanging half off. The chicken coop had collapsed under time's patience. Weeds curled around the porch steps. This place could use a woman's hand. She murmured to herself. Luke overheard. It could use a miracle. She turned toward him. "Miracles start small." He said nothing, but the corner of his mouth lifted, just slightly. By afternoon, she'd rolled up her sleeves and started sweeping the porch, shaking out rugs, scrubbing what could still be saved. The motions were simple, familiar, and for the first time, they didn't feel like chores. They felt like reclamation. Luke watched from the barn door, his gaze unreadable. When she caught him staring, he looked away quickly and busied himself with the tools. Later, as the sun began to sink, she carried a pail of water from the well, her arms trembling under the weight. Luke appeared beside her without a word, taking the handle with one hand. "You'll wear yourself out," he said. "I've been worn out before," she replied softly. "Didn't kill me then." His jaw tightened, something flickering behind his eyes, maybe respect, maybe something deeper. They stood there for a while, the light bleeding orange across the yard. It was a quiet sort of peace, the kind that made two people strangers no longer, even if neither dared to say so aloud. When night came, Martha cooked a small pot of stew, the scent of herbs and fire filling the air. She set 2 bowls on the table inside the house. Luke entered hesitantly, wiping his hands on a rag. "Didn't expect supper," he said. "Neither did I." She replied, "Guess we're both surprised." They sat across from each other. The stew was simple but warm. He ate slow, every spoonful heavy with thought. She kept her eyes on her bowl, heart unsteady for reasons she didn't understand. Halfway through the meal, Luke spoke, voice low, almost cautious. "You don't owe me for bringing you here." She looked up, startled. "I didn't think I did. Just making sure." He said, "You work if you want, rest if you need. Nobody here's keeping count." Her eyes glistened in the candlelight. "Then maybe I'll stay a while, till I earn my keep." He nodded. "That's fair." Outside, the wind picked up, brushing softly against the walls. The sound was almost like words neither of them could say. Later, when Luke stepped out to check the horses, Martha lingered at the doorway, watching him in the starlight. The way he moved, calm, precise, gentle, even with the roughest of things, made something stir inside her chest she hadn't felt in years. Not desire, not yet, but something older, quieter, trust. She whispered to herself, Maybe this road didn't lead to nowhere after all. And as the night deepened around them, the silence of the west wrapped both souls in its wide, wordless mercy, a promise forming not in speech, but in the steady rhythm of shared labor and unspoken grace. Martha began to lose count of them, each one washing over her like the tide smoothing broken stones. The town had forgotten her, or maybe it had chosen to. But out here, the world was wide enough for forgetting, wide enough for something new to take root. Every morning she swept the porch before the light touched it. She'd hum softly an old hymn her mother used to sing, one about finding grace in unlikely places. Luke never said anything, but sometimes when he passed by, she'd catch him slowing his steps to listen. He'd built her a small shelf for her things, rough wood, uneven cuts, but made by hand. Didn't have to, she'd told him. He just shrugged and said, wasn't doing much anyway. They spoke little, but their silences had grown soft, comfortable. One evening, as she mended a torn shirt by the fire, she asked, "You ever been married, Luke?" He paused, setting down his mug. "Once," he said, "a long time ago." "What happened?" "She died." Martha lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry. Don't be. Life's cruel sometimes, kind too in its own way, but never fair." The fire popped between them. Shadows moved along the walls like memories trying to find their way home. After a while, she said, "You must have loved her." He nodded slowly, enough to let her go. Martha didn't know what to say after that. She stitched in silence, but her hands trembled slightly. There was a sorrow in him, not loud or angry, but deep, buried like the roots of an old tree that still stands after every storm. The next morning, a wagon rattled down the road toward the ranch. Luke stiffened when he saw it. It was Sheriff Collins' men, two of them, riding lazy but watchful. Martha's breath caught. The memory of laughter, of her humiliation, slammed through her chest. Luke stepped off the porch, his tone calm but firm. "Can I help you?" One of the deputies grinned. "Sheriff heard you picked up something that don't belong to you." Luke's eyes narrowed. "Ain't nothing here that ain't mine." The man looked past him toward Martha. "Funny, she sure looks familiar." Martha stepped back, fear flaring in her throat. "Luke." He didn't move. "She's under my roof," he said evenly. "That makes her under my protection." The deputy's smile faltered. "You plannin' to fight the law over a woman?" Luke's voice dropped lower. "I don't fight for what's mine. I just don't give it up easy." There was something in his eyes that made the men hesitate. They muttered to each other, then turned their horses and rode off, leaving a trail of dust twisting in the sun. When they were gone, Martha stood frozen, staring at the empty road. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. He turned to her. "Why not? They'll be back. They'll tell everyone where I am. Then let 'em come." Her voice broke. "You don't understand, Luke. I was made a fool of. I was the joke of that town. I can't face them again." He stepped closer, his words steady, quiet. "Then you don't, not unless you choose to." Tears welled in her eyes, hot, ashamed, defiant. "You don't know what it's like." "I know what it's like to be broken," he said, "and I know what it's like to build again." For a moment, neither of them moved. The air was thick, heavy with the weight of things unsaid. Finally, she whispered, "Why are you helping me?" He looked at her, really looked. "Because when I saw you standing there, I saw someone who still had fight left, even if you didn't see it yourself." She turned away, blinking hard. "You shouldn't see that in me." "Too late," he said softly. That night, she lay awake, listening to the wind slide through the cracks of the old walls. Every word he'd said kept circling her mind, not as comfort, but as challenge. Out here, there was no crowd to mock her, no voices to remind her of what she wasn't. There was only the land, and one man who didn't flinch at the sight of her. And for the first time, she wondered if redemption wasn't something given but something earned, piece by piece, by simply refusing to stay broken. As the first light of dawn crept across her floorboards, she whispered to herself, Maybe I was never weak, just waiting for the right reason to stand. The morning after the sheriff's men rode away, the air felt heavier, like the sky itself was watching. Luke worked in silence, fixing a fence post near the east pasture. Martha stood nearby, helping hold the beam steady. Neither spoke, but their hands moved in rhythm, bound by the same quiet tension. When the hammer struck the last nail, he wiped the sweat from his brow and glanced toward the ridge. Dust trails shimmered in the distance, the kind made by riders. Company again. Martha asked softly. Maybe, he muttered, or maybe just the wind. But he didn't believe it. By noon, the horizon had settled back to calm. Still, something restless had settled in both of them. Inside, Martha started kneading dough for bread. Her hands pressed hard into the mixture, as if each push could silence her thoughts. Luke came in later, dust clinging to his boots. He hesitated before speaking. "You've taken to this place quick." She didn't look up. "Gives me something to do, something to fix." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes fixing a thing means letting it break first." She stopped, meeting his eyes. "You saying that about me?" He held her gaze, unflinching. "I'm saying you ain't broken. You just ain't been seen right." For a long moment, neither looked away. Then she smiled, small, cautious, real. "You always talk like that. Only when I mean it." The rest of the day passed with the ease of routine. She cooked, he repaired a stall door, the wind hummed against the walls. But beneath that simplicity, a current began to move, something unspoken, fragile, alive. That evening, Luke found her outside, sitting on the porch steps. The sunset painted her face gold and crimson. She looked tired, but peaceful. He sat beside her, leaving a careful space between them. "You ever think about going back?" he asked. "To town, yeah." She shook her head. "What would I go back for? To remind them what they laughed at?" He turned toward her. "You don't go back for them. You go back for you." Her voice trembled. "I'm not that brave." "Not yet," he said quietly. "But you will be." The wind rose again, carrying the faint scent of rain. She looked at him, this man who said little, but somehow heard everything she never spoke. "I don't understand you," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "You don't have to. Just trust that I mean what I say." Lightning flickered in the far distance. She stared at the sky, at the vastness of it all. "When I was little," she murmured, "my mama used to say the Lord puts storms in our path to remind us we're still alive." Luke nodded. "Then maybe it's time we start living again." The rain came soon after, slow at first, then steady. They moved inside, the roof drumming above them. The fire glowed warm, casting their shadows together on the wall. Martha poured 2 mugs of coffee, her hands still shaking a little. "Strange," she said, "how quiet it gets out here. Makes you hear your own thoughts too loud." Luke looked into his cup. "Some folks spend their whole life running from that quiet. Were you one of them? Used to be," he said. "Till I figured silence don't hurt near as much as regret." Her eyes lifted, catching the faintest trace of sadness in his expression. "You miss her, don't you, your wife?" He nodded once, every day, but missing her ain't the same as dying with her. She took a slow breath. "You think people like us ever really get second chances?" He leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. "I think people like us make 'em." The words settled deep, quiet but certain, the kind that doesn't fade when the fire burns out. Outside, the rain eased, leaving only the soft tap of water slipping from the roof. Martha stood and moved to the doorway, watching the land glisten under the fading storm. The moon broke through the clouds, silver and new. She felt something stir, faint, trembling, but strong enough to lift her chest. Luke stepped beside her. "Beautiful, ain't it?" She nodded. "Almost feels like the land's been washed clean." He looked at her, his voice low. "Maybe that's what you're doing too." She turned to him, not smiling, not crying, just standing there between shadow and light. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I'm just learning how to begin." He gave a quiet nod, the kind that meant more than words. And for a long while, They stood together, two souls weathered by the world, neither needing to speak, because the silence finally felt safe. Sometimes love doesn't come like thunder. It comes like the hush after it, gentle, steady, a silence that feels safe. The rain had passed, leaving behind a soft mist that clung to the morning grass. Martha stepped outside with a pail, her boots sinking into damp soil. The ranch smelled of wet earth and pine. Every breath carried a strange peace she hadn't known in years. Inside, Luke moved about the kitchen, clumsy with dishes but trying. He'd been doing that lately, small things she never asked for, fixing a hinge, mending a bucket, lighting the stove before dawn. Little pieces of care that said more than words ever could. When she came in, cheeks pink from the cold, he glanced up. "Coffee's hot," he said simply. She smiled faintly. "You trying to spoil me now?" "Just trying to make the morning easier." She poured a cup, hands brushing his as she took the pot. The touch lasted half a second, but it burned through both of them. Neither spoke. The quiet between them had changed, no longer empty, but full of something they couldn't name. Later that afternoon, the clouds rolled back and sunlight spilled over the fields. Luke hitched the wagon to fetch lumber from the south end of the property. "You wanna ride along?" he asked. Martha hesitated, then nodded. "Ain't been past the creek since I came here." He helped her up, his hand steady at her elbow. The road stretched wide and golden before them. The wheels creaked. The horses' hooves thudded against wet dirt. The world seemed to breathe again. For a while, neither said much. The rhythm of travel spoke for them. Then Martha broke the quiet. "Used to dream about leaving Harper County," she said. "Only I never thought I'd actually do it." "What stopped you?" "Fear, I guess, that if I left I'd still be the same, just lonely somewhere else." Luke looked ahead, reins loose in his hands. "Ain't the place that changes a person. It's what they decide to build after." She studied his profile, the set jaw, the faint scar by his temple, the wear of sun and sorrow. "And what are you building, Luke Carver?" He paused. "Something that lasts this time." Her eyes softened. "You sound like a man who's lost more than he'll admit." He chuckled, low and rough, "Maybe, but I reckon loss has a way of teaching what matters." They reached the south ridge by late day. The land opened wide, dotted with wildflowers swaying under the new sun. Martha climbed down, her skirt brushing over yellow petals. She closed her eyes and let the wind pass through her hair. Luke watched her for a moment, not with pity, not even with admiration, but something deeper, the kind of quiet respect born from watching someone rebuild themselves from ashes. "You ever think," she said softly, "that maybe God don't make mistakes? Maybe He just waits for us to catch up?" He nodded. "Maybe that's why I found you when I did." The words hung there, heavy and real. She turned to him, startled not by the sound, but by the truth inside it. He quickly looked away, pretending to check the wagon straps. "We should head back before dark." The air between them shifted again, fragile, electric. As they rode home, the sunset burned red across the sky. Martha leaned against the side rail, her heart uneasy. Something was happening between them, slow, undeniable, dangerous only because it felt so pure. Back at the house, Luke unloaded the lumber in silence. Martha lit the lantern and watched him from the doorway. His movements were slow, thoughtful, as if each one carried memory. When he came inside, the glow from the fire caught the lines of his face. He looked at her, then really looked. "You've done more for this place in weeks than I managed in years," he said quietly. She lowered her gaze. "I just cleaned what was already good underneath." He stepped closer. "You did more than clean, Martha. You brought life back." Her breath hitched. "Luke." But he didn't finish the thought. He just smiled, faint and real. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's another long day." She nodded, though her heart thudded louder than the ticking clock on the wall. That night, lying awake in her small room, she listened to the sound of rain returning. Each drop against the roof felt like a heartbeat she couldn't ignore. She thought of his words, his eyes, his stillness that spoke louder than any man's speech ever had. And for the first time, she didn't feel like an outcast. She felt seen. Not as the fat one, not as a burden, but as a woman who mattered. The fire crackled in the next room where Luke still sat awake. Neither of them slept much, but both dreamed not of what was lost, but of what might finally be found. The next 3 days brought steady rain, the kind that soaks into the bones of a house and the souls inside it. Luke couldn't work the fences, and Martha couldn't hang laundry, so they stayed in, sharing a silence that had grown warm instead of heavy. The mornings began with her humming near the stove, soft and tuneless. Luke would sit nearby, patching harness straps, pretending not to listen. But the melody lingered in his mind long after she stopped. By afternoon, the rain drummed harder, and they both turned to chores that didn't need doing anything to keep their hands busy. On the third night, lightning cracked across the hills. The power of it shook the windows. Martha startled, her cup slipping slightly. Luke caught it before it fell. Their hands froze together not for balance, but because neither wanted to pull away. He looked at her then, eyes dark and gentle. "You scared?" She shook her head, though her voice betrayed her. "Used to be, not anymore." He smiled faintly. "Guess fear don't stick to you long." The thunder rolled again, deep and long. She took a slow breath. "I think it does," she whispered. "I just don't let it win anymore." He nodded, still holding her hand. Then he let go, slow, careful, like setting something precious down. They stood in that quiet, the air between them charged, but soft. Later, when the storm eased, Luke went to check the barn. Martha followed with a lantern. The roof leaked, water dripping through cracks. She held the light high while he worked. He glanced up at her once, hair damp, light shimmering on her face. "Never seen someone look so calm holding chaos." She smiled. "Guess I've lived through worse storms." He chuckled under his breath. "Reckon you have." When the work was done, they lingered at the barn door. Outside, the rain had turned to a whisper. The smell of wet hay filled the air. Luke leaned against a post, the glow from the lantern brushing his shoulders. "Martha," he said quietly, "you ever wonder why I brought you here that day?" She looked at him, cautious. "I figured you were just kind." He shook his head. "Kindness don't cost silver." Her breath caught, then why? He hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because when the sheriff laughed, you didn't cry. You just stood there still, proud, hurt maybe, but not broken. I saw more strength in that silence than in all the men in that town." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. "You shouldn't have done it," she said softly. "People will think." "I don't care what they think." The words cut clean through the rain. He stepped closer, voice low, almost trembling. "Let them talk. They've been talking their whole lives. I'm done listening." She turned away, heart pounding, unsure if she was more afraid of the storm outside or the one inside her. "You don't know what it's like, Luke, to be looked at and laughed at, to be a joke before you even open your mouth." He paused, then reached for her hand, his touch firm but gentle. "I know what it's like to lose everything that made you feel human, and I know what it's like when someone gives it back without meaning to." She stared at him, at the rain in his hair, the truth in his eyes. Her voice cracked. "You don't owe me that kind of mercy." "This ain't mercy," he said. "It's truth." The lantern flame flickered between them, shadows dancing across the barn walls. The distance that once guarded them was gone. Martha swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "You make it sound like I matter." Luke smiled slow, steady. "You do, more than you think." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything they hadn't dared to say. When the rain stopped completely, they stepped out into the cool night air. The clouds broke open, and moonlight poured across the fields. Martha tilted her face to the sky, eyes glistening. "Feels like the world's been washed clean again." Luke looked at her, his voice soft. "Maybe it's not the world that changed." She turned, meeting his gaze. "Maybe not." A faint wind brushed through the tall grass, carrying the scent of pine and rain. He wanted to say more, to tell her how her presence had turned silence into comfort, how her laughter had found its way into the hollow places of his heart, but the words stayed behind his teeth. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled something small, a delicate silver locket, worn and polished. She gasped. "Where did you?" "Found it in the old dresser. Figured it was yours." Her fingers trembled as she took it. The hinge was mended, the chain whole again. Inside was a faded picture, her mother. Tears slipped down her cheeks, quiet and unashamed. "I thought I'd lost this forever." He looked at her gently. "Some things just need a little fixing, same as people." Her lips quivered. "You didn't have to, I know," he said, "but I wanted to." She clutched the locket close, heart full and aching. "Thank you, Luke, for seeing me." He nodded, eyes warm. "You make it hard not to." They stood there until the dawn began to pale the sky, two souls washed clean by rain, by kindness, by a love that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. Sometimes peace is just the breath before the wind changes. For weeks the ranch had known calm, the kind that settles deep in the bones. The land was green again, the fences straight, the air gentle. Luke worked from dawn till dark, but there was something lighter in his step, something alive behind his quiet eyes. And Martha, she moved through the house like she belonged there. Her laughter, once cautious, had started to linger in the air. Even the horses seemed calmer when she passed. But good things in the frontier never lasted long. The morning it began, the sky wore a strange color, too still, too bright, like it was holding its breath. Luke noticed it while hauling hay. Storm coming. He murmured, mostly to himself. By noon, the wind had turned restless. Martha was in the kitchen, rolling dough, when she heard the horses snort sharply outside. Luke entered, brushing dust from his hat. His face carried that quiet alertness she'd come to recognize. "Riders," he said simply. Her hands froze over the flower, who, he didn't answer, just stepped to the window, eyes narrowing toward the trail. A slow cloud of dust climbed the ridge. Within the hour, the first voices echoed, laughter, rough and cruel, too familiar to mistake. The sheriff. Martha felt the color drain from her face. "He's here." Luke's jaw tightened. "Looks that way." He turned toward her, voice steady but low. "Stay inside. Whatever happens, you don't answer him." She nodded, though her chest was trembling. "Luke, what does he want?" He adjusted his belt, eyes never leaving the door. "Trouble. That's all men like him ever want." The sheriff's voice boomed across the yard. "Well, I'll be damned."